Hello YouTube and welcome to a new video on the Future Programmer YouTube channel. In today's Java Basics video, we will continue to explore Java methods. In particular, we will be talking about Java methods that take parameters and return values. What are these? Well, let's find out. Today, we're going to talk about two important topics related to methods in Java programming. The first of which is method parameters, and the second of which is returning data in methods. If you remember from the last video of this course, we talked about the concept of methods and wrote a few simple methods in Java. Just to quickly review, methods are blocks of code that we can define. These are sets of instructions that we can define, and when we call a method, the instructions in that method will be run by Java. Last video, our methods simply do some things like printing something out, performing some mathematical operations, maybe declaring and initializing some variables. However, these actions do not take any inputs. In other words, each time we run a method, the exact same thing will happen. In many scenarios though, we want our methods to take inputs and perform different operations depending on the inputs given. These inputs are called parameters in programming. Let's think about the example that we were using last video with the burger making method. So if we have a method that is used to make burgers, we will have our method put down a piece of bread and then put down some ingredients and then putting down another piece of bread. That's working fine. So when we want to make a burger, we can just call this burger making method and Java will run the code inside of the method and we will make a burger. However, what if we want to make multiple different types of burgers? Or perhaps we want to use different types of bread and different types of ingredients to make the burger. Well, in that case, we can use parameters to pass in different values into the method, and we'll use different types of bread and ingredients based on the values of the inputs. So this is kind of the use case of using parameters in Java methods. And in addition to accepting inputs from the method call, methods can also output data to the method call, and this is called returning data. Notice how know that even though we call this output, this is not printing something out into our terminal. Instead, this is literally returning data from inside of our method to the place where our method was called. Before we talk about input accepting and output returning methods in Java, let's first make sure we understand mathematical functions conceptually, since math functions and Java methods with parameters and return values are very related. Here we have two math functions. If you aren't familiar with functions in math, we can read this as f of x is equal to x times x. What this is saying is we have a function called f. In the parentheses is its input. It accepts one input, x, and f of x is going to multiply x, this input value, by itself, and this is the result of this function. G of x is going to take an input x, multiply it by 3, and then add 4 to it, and then output the result. This way, we can pass in different x values to these functions, and we'll get different outputs depending on the inputs that we used. So with f of x equals to x times x, if we pass in 2 as x, so 2 will be equal to x, or x will be equal to 2. So 2 times 2, we'll get f of 2 is equal to 4. If we pass in negative 4 into f, so f of negative 4 will be equal to negative 4 times negative 4. This will give us 16. So functions have mainly three parts. They have an input part, which in this case is the x in both scenarios. And we have the operations, which is the squaring x and the 3x plus 4. We're doing something to the input, and then we're outputting the result. So f of 2 will give us the result, the output of 4, and f of negative 4 will give us 16. Methods are quite similar to functions in that they can, but they don't need to have these three parts. So we have parameters. This is equivalent to inputs in math functions. We can have our methods accept some inputs from the method call and use these values inside of our method. And then we have the method body. And these are the operations that we're performing, perhaps with the parameters or perhaps entirely separate and independent from our parameters. And lastly, we can optionally return some value as the output from our method. We already talked about this syntax of methods in the last video. Today we're just going to look at three parts of this code block. We're going to talk about the return type. So now we know that methods can return data to the place where they were called. We need to state the data type of the return value when we write the method's header. So after we write modifiers, which is public static for our purpose, we want to write the return type of our method. So if our method returns an int, we want to write int in place of return type. If it returns a string, we will do that in place of return type. If it returns a boolean, we will write return type right here. And if a method does not return a value, which is the case with all our methods in the last video, we want to write void in the place of return type so that Java knows that our method will not be returning any values. And then we have the method name, that's the name of our method, and then we have the parameter list inside of a pair of parentheses. This is the list of parameters, the list of inputs that our method can accept. So if we want our method to accept a string, an int, and a double in that order, we can write string a int x double my double parameter. And you can name these whatever you want. These are essentially variables that we can later access inside of our method's body. So if we have string, for example, string name, then we can print out name in the method body so that if we pass in a different name to a method's call, then different outputs will be shown onto our screen because our string name, our name parameter will be different, and the same deal with other parameters. And this list of parameters will be comma separated. So we can write string a, this is one parameter, comma, int x, this is one parameter, and then comma, double, my double parameter. This is the third parameter of our method. And when we want to return something from a method, this is optional, as was the case with parameter list. These are both optional. So when we return a value, we can just write return and then return value. Return value can either be a variable or it can just be one value. We can always have a method return true. We can always have a method return hello world. This is essentially how we can have our method return some value from within to where the method was called. So now let's turn the mathematical function f of x is equal to x squared into a Java method. The way how we can do that is we can write public static. This is the modifiers. And then we have the return type. Since we want our method f to return a numerical data, we can write double here. And you can also use int if you would like, but I did double here because we may also pass in 1.5 into our method f, which will return a value with decimal numbers. So that's the return type of our method. It will return a double. Inside of here is the parameter list. In this case, it will take a single one parameter, which is a double value, and it is going to be called x. You can call this whatever you want. You can call this my awesome parameter value that is a double. It's a really long name, and you probably don't want to write so much, but that is also an acceptable name as long as it is a valid variable name. But know that if you change this to another name, that means in this method, you will have to write another name as well. So instead of writing return x times x, you'll have to write return my variable times my variable. That's also fine. So in this case, I have used double x as our parameter name. And in our method, we're returning the input times itself. So f is going to return the input squared. Notice how we changed the return type to double because our method returns a double. The parameter list now contains one parameter, a double variable called x. Our method body will square the input x and then return the result. So when we want to call our method f with an input like 2, we can just write f parentheses 2 parentheses. In the last video of this course, when we were calling methods, we can just write the method name and then a pair of empty parentheses with nothing inside. Well, in that case, because we never defined our methods to accept any inputs, obviously we won't be passing any inputs into our method. Therefore, our parentheses were empty in the last video. And since we're passing arguments, it's the technical name of inputs. So when we're passing our arguments into a method call, we want to put it inside of this parentheses. The difference between parameters and arguments is that when we define a method, this is a parameter. We're defining f to accept an argument of x. This is a parameter. And when we're calling a value or calling a method, the value passed into the method call, this is called an argument. So we can also store the value that's returned from a method call in a variable so that we can use this value later, perhaps even as input to another method call. And the reason why we can do that is the same reason as here, because we're literally returning a value into where the method was called. F of 2 will be whatever is returned here. 2 times 2 is 4. F of 2, this thing right here, is equal to 4. So what we're telling Java to do is we're printing out 4. It's as simple as that. We're printing out the return value from our method f. Here, f of negative 4, that is equal to negative 4 times negative 4, that is 16. Our double value y will be equal to 16. So we can print out not only y, but we can also pass 16 into f again. So f of 16 will give us 16 squared, which is equal to 256. So let's first take a look at this. Let me just copy this code. Actually, I have to first copy this method definition into our online Java editor. And then let's copy this line of code in place of this hello world statement. Let's just print out f of 2. And then let's copy these 3 lines of code after that. Now, if I run this program, we should see 4, 16, and 256 printed out. So 4, 16, 256. The reason why we have the .0 at the end is because we defined our method f to return a double, which is why it's essentially returning the result as a double value instead of an integer. So 4.0, 16.0, and 256.0. Now it's your turn to convert the following math function into a Java method. So g of x is equal to 3x plus 4 is the method that you will be defining into a Java method. Think about what is the method name, what are the parameters that it will accept, what data type that is, what the return data type is, what will happen inside of our method body. So take a few moments to do that. And hopefully you got something that looks something like this. public static, that is just literally we'll write this every time we write a method at this point in our Java learning journey. And then we have the return type, double. G of x will return a double value. The method name is called g. In parentheses, we put in double x. This is the list of parameters. We have one parameter called x. It is a double. Inside of our method, we're returning 3 times the input plus 4. So whatever we pass in here, we'll multiply 3 by that number and then add 4 to the result of this. So this plus 4 is whatever's returned from g of x. To call the method g in the main method, we can just write system.out.println g of 3, system.out.println g of -10. So let's copy this code into our editor. And we can have multiple methods in the same class, so we can have as many methods as we want. So let's just copy this code into our main method. So Java is going to go to our main method. It's going to run these code. And when Java sees f of 2, it's going to go to f, run the code inside of here using the input 2 as x, and then it will print out the result of it. Same thing with the f of here, f of -4 here, and also with g of x. So we'll pass in 3 as x into g and return 3 times 3 plus 4. That's going to give us 13, and -10 times 3, -30 plus 4, so -26 if I did my math correctly. So running this program, we should see those values printed out. So indeed, we get 13 and -26. It's important to note that when we call a method, we have to pass the arguments into the method call exactly as it was defined in our method definition. So if we defined our method to take a double and then a string, then we will have to pass it exactly in that order, where we pass a double value, then a string value. So in other words, if our method is expecting a Boolean value, we cannot pass a string hello in place of that parameter. And methods can also take more than one parameter, since methods can take as many parameters as they want, and they don't have to be of the same data type either. So we have a method here. It's a pretty short but also somewhat complicated method compared to the ones we have been doing so far. So public static void is not going to return anything. It's called greetFriend. It takes a string parameter called name, an int parameter called age, and a Boolean parameter called isProgrammer. So we can pass a string, an int, and a Boolean into our greetFriend method, and our method will print out, hello, my name is whatever my name is, and my age is whatever my age is. And we can also have if-else statements inside a method. So if isProgrammer is true, we'll print out, hey, I'm a programmer. Otherwise, we'll print out, I am not a programmer, but I am learning programming. So let's copy this code into our editor. Indent this properly. And this should be fine. Let me just comment out those method calls since we won't be needing them. So let's just, for some reason, Replic's color highlighting is not working, or perhaps that feature was just disabled somewhere. So commenting those lines of code out, we can put those inside of our method, our main method. So here, we're calling our greetFriend method with name being Sophia and age being 15. isProgrammer will be true. So that should give us, hello, my name is Sophia and I am 15-year-old. And then we'll print out, I am a programmer. And then we have Aiden. So we're passing in Aiden as the name, 15 as the age, false as isProgrammer. So we'll print out, I am not a programmer, but I am learning programming. Let's take a look at the output. Hopefully we get the results that we expected. So hello, my name is Sophia and I am 15-year-old. I am a programmer. Hello, my name is Aiden and I am 15-year-old. I am not a programmer, but I am learning programming. And in fact, right now our output is somewhat crowded, so we can actually print out another line here. So let's define in greet friend. Let's write system.out.println, nothing inside, parentheses, semicolon. Running this, we should see a blank line inserted before our output. And the great thing about methods is that once you change something inside of a method, every time you call a method or that method, the change will be reflected. So printing out a blank line before our outputs, you can see now it happens every time we call our method. Notice how this method takes parameters but doesn't return anything, because these two things are both optional, and having one does not necessarily mean we need the other. Today, we learned about method parameters and returning data from methods. These are very key concepts that are very important in Java methods and will be used in most, if not all, the programs that you will write. And that's it for this video about methods that take parameters and return values. If you found this video helpful, please consider subscribing to my channel down below. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them down in the comment section. And with that said, thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you in more programming tutorials.